And the reason that it has the hand clutch and the foot clutch is the Canadians couldn't ride it properly and kept falling off. Hello and welcome to the channel Seen with Chips. If you haven't been here before, then welcome. Please consider subscribing and pressing the bell button so that you can be notified of all the videos that I'm making throughout the year. Well, if you've been watching the recent videos, you'll be seeing that I've been going around a motorcycle vintage bike collection and having a look around the different bikes. Well, today we're going to look around a 1940s military WLC. But just before I do, I've been pondering, you know, if you have a photographic memory, are you born with that or does it take time to develop? Haha, I'm here all week. Right, this bike is a 1942 WLC. Now, the WLC, the C stands for Canadian. And a lot of people think that it actually stands for a civilian version, but this is a military bike, but the C actually stands for Canadian, not civilian. This bike was given to the Canadians by the Americans, but mainly as a peacekeeping vehicle, not a war vehicle. And so initially it wasn't equipped with gun carrying facilities, but over the years it got adapted, and so now this one is exactly as it was found, and it does actually have a gun carrier at the front here, complete with gun in there. Just as an aside here, if you remember on the last video we talked about on the 1929 bike, and we talked about the round toolbox. This one has gone now to the kidney-shaped toolbox that you're probably familiar with for modern day bikes. But also, again, moving on, we're keeping with a theme, there's the bicycle pump. So no visit to the garage compressor for you with that, you just carry your own. This particular bike, I say as found, is carrying the leg shields on here, but something really interesting about this bike is down underneath here, if I can just reach down and show you, it's got some armor plating underneath there, that when this bike was actually used in a battle situation, the guy would lean his bike down and he would fire over the back of the bike. So the bike was actually being used as protection as well as somewhere to steady his gun. And as you see here in this picture, there's a picture of him actually firing his gun over the bike. Now, I mentioned that this one particularly carries a gun, but you may notice that there's actually a baseball bat and a glove here. Now, the reason for this is obviously when they were in the war, they had to have some downtime. So they used to have a game of baseball with the guys. So they have a baseball bat and a glove. And also there's his trench spade that you can imagine what these guys had gone through in those days. But this one is still carrying his oh, heavy these things, a Thompson machine gun still in this bike. How original is this thing? It's fantastic, isn't it? Right, I mentioned that this is a Canadian bike, and just to give you a little bit here, there's the Canadian maple leaf on the front there, but also you'll see that this down here, it's got a front stand. But then if we go back along the bike to the back here, and you'll see it's also got a rear stand. So you'd say, well, why the hell would you have two stands? But this bike, the Canadian version, is the only one that had interchangeable wheels. So the back wheel and the front wheel are the same. So if when they're in battle or they're on the battlefield and they actually got a puncture in one of the wheels, it's obviously easier to ride with a puncture in the front wheel than it is in the back wheel. So they could change the wheels. So they could lift the bike up, take them both off, switch them round, and and be able to get back on the road and away again. But the Canadian version is the only one that had the twin stands. Again, unique to the Canadian version that a lot of people don't know. As I've been filming this, I've actually made a schoolboy error, and this bike is not a 1942, it's a much more modern bike, it's a 1943. I do apologise about that, but on here you've got all the relevant details that you would have on this bike with the oils and etc. that you would have. The speedo. And then I think, what is this S on the side? Now, I believe this S actually stands for the fact that this bike is suppressed. Now, I'm not fully sure on what the suppression actually means, but I believe it's something to do with the detection of the electronics. Again, all to do with war and being a military bike. But, you know, to be quite honest, you're talking about a 1943 bike here. And it really is quite a clever piece of kit, isn't it, really? You know, when they talk about being able to suppress the electronics in those days. When I spoke of the speedometer, as you can see on there, this has got just over 42,700 miles of original miles since 1942. And I was interested to know what this lever here was. Evidently that was a steering damper where you can tighten up the forks. On modern bikes nowadays, you have to sort of preset them when you're putting the forks in, and a big bolt or nut that you have to fill, but you can do this on the fly. You can actually suppress the damping of the forks as and when you need them, depending on your terrain of riding. Right, when I was talking about that S and the suppression of the electrics, there's something else quite interesting about this particular bike. Obviously, with it being a military bike, you've got certain things that are really quite fascinating. There's a switch here, right, that will switch off the rear lights so the bike can't be followed. So as you can imagine, if you're in a military situation and you don't want to be followed, you can turn off the rear lights. But also, when you come round to the front, we're going past the gun, etc. And then you'll see here, we've got a blackout light. And that's, again, so that you've got as much camouflage as you possibly can. And then coming down here, you've got a marker light. Now, this is a Canadian-only style marker light. You don't get this on any of the other bikes apart from the Canadian version. So we'll go around to the back now, and I'll show you the rear lighting. And if you see, there's just marker lights on the back there. Neat. I mean, if you look, nowadays people are trying to get their rear lights very, very tiny. As I've got on mine, I've got very small LED lights on the back. In 1942, they were doing these very tiny lights, but obviously for different reasons then. It was to do with not being seen. The Canadian version actually carries the gun, but also carries the ammunition box down here, which is quite quirky. But something I found out that's quite funny, and you'll have to excuse me for saying this, because I'm not sure whether I'm being politically correct or not in saying it, but this is the Canadian version is the only version that has a hand clutch, and it also has a foot clutch. And the reason that it has the hand clutch and the foot clutch is the Canadians couldn't ride it properly and kept falling off. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to get blasted down for that, but that was the reason why it had two. And then just coming up here, you've got the petrol caps, and there's the petrol switch to switch the petrol on and off. That seems to be in a bit of a quirky place, but I guess these bikes were quirky in those days. Now, I did say that it has a hand clutch and a foot clutch. and the Canadians couldn't ride it and kept falling off. But to be quite honest, this here is the gear changer, which is with your left hand, and the clutch is here with your left hand. I'm not sure actually that I could ride the damn thing with having the clutch and the gear changer on the same side. I think I'd probably be falling off all the time as well. So not only did they have a left-hand clutch, a left-hand gear change, but also on this side is a left-hand throttle. Now, obviously, we all know that on modern bikes, the throttle is on the right-hand side, but evidently they had the throttle on the left-hand side so that it leaves their right hand free to be able to shoot with as they're riding, a bit like Arnie on his Fat Boy in the Terminator. But on this side, you've got an advance and retard on there for the spark. So to be quite honest, these bikes are quite a complex piece of kit to ride. They're not like the thing we have nowadays where we just like twist and go really with just a gear. Moving on then, we've got the seat here, which is in its, reasonable condition for the year. But then coming down to here, something quite interesting that I've learnt, right? You've got some pegs here that come down. Now, there's one on each side. You may confuse those with passenger foot pegs, okay? But obviously this bike doesn't have a rear seat for a passenger. But what those pegs are for standing up and riding through the fields through the mud and guts or whatever it is you've got in the fields of the battlefield. It's got one on this side as well, so that the rider could actually stand up and ride, because obviously with it having front footboards like a lot of Harleys have, you can't really stand up with it because your feet are too far forward and your weight is all in the wrong position. But they've thought of it so that they can ride over the humps and bumps of the fields, of the battlefield. This bike then being the first bikes of the military, the Harley, because obviously the Harley Davidson, it really saved them, being able to supply the military. And this is quite a sophisticated bike for its day. But if we then move over to one here, this is a 1996 MT, Harley Davidson MT, which was the last of the military bikes that they built, that Harley Davidson built. I'm not going to really go around much on this one, just the fact that it's a nice bike in the collection. But I suppose what you could say is that's a military bike, but if you take that into civilian livery, that could be the forerunner of the Pan America. I guess that's the first venture into the adventure bike. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did. But now the next bike that I'm going to be looking around, you need to really subscribe and be notified of this one, because this is quite a jewel in the crown. This is a 1916 Type M bike, and you'll see the picture there. This was used for the US mail. So that's the next one we're going to have a look around. So please subscribe and press the bell button, and that'll let you know when it's going to come up and you can watch it. Okay, bye for now.